Psychics are one of the simpler powers in Anima. Overall, the effects list is somewhat limited, but it's easily one of the most flexible powers as well. Willpower is the most important characteristic for Psychics. This is used primarily for determining how strong your psychic powers are. Dexterity is another important consideration, since it factors into the accuracy for these powers. Constitution shouldn't be overlooked either. A loss of stamina is one of the potential drawbacks for using psychic powers. Willpower specifically determines your base psychic potential according to the chart on page 193. Psychic potential is always rolled every time you ever use a psychic power. The total of this roll determines not only the effectiveness of the power, but whether or not it succeeds. You can have your character spend time concentrating to raise their psychic potential for the next roll they make, though in situations where time is of the essence, such as combat, this isn't always an option. Additionally, if you do anything besides using a psychic power on your turn, your psychic potential takes a 25-point penalty. Psychic projection is basically your ability to aim your psychic powers. It's used in place of an attack for any powers that are meant to harm or affect somebody, and in place of defense for any power that's meant to stop attacks. Characters can attempt to dodge psychic abilities used on them, but unless they can see psychic energy, they do so as if they're blind. A character that can somehow affect energy is also able to attempt blocking psychic abilities. Psychic projection also affects the range you can reach with your powers. And the third and final factor in psychic powers is psychic points, and these are what grant psychics their flexibility. Psychic points are spent in one of two ways, either temporarily, with them being regained normally after 1 hour, or permanently, where they never come back. The first of the permanent uses is gaining an affinity for a psychic discipline. All the psychic powers are organized into disciplines, and before you can learn these powers, you need to spend a psychic point to gain affinity for that discipline. Simple enough, right? And that brings us to mastering a new mental power. After you spend a point for this, you choose a power that's in one of the disciplines you have an affinity for, and you can start using it. Powers can be rated from level 1 to 3. In order to learn a level 3 power from a discipline, you first need to master a level 2 power, and in order to learn a level 2 power, you first need to master a level 1 power. Psychic points can also be used to increase your psychic potential, based on the chart on page 194, also shown here. The number in parentheses is the most important one. This is how many points you'll need to have to spend to gain the bonus listed. Basically, you gain a plus 10 bonus every time you increase your potential, but the amount of points you need to spend increases by 1 every time you do raise your potential. If that exponential cost is a bit much for you though, there is also the option of permanently spending psychic points to raise your potential for a single power. You can spend up to 5 points to improve one of your powers, and each one you do spend increases your potential for that power by 10. Finally, you can spend 2 points to gain an innate slot. Basically, if a power can be maintained, you can put it in an innate slot, so you don't have to keep rolling for it every time you want to use it. The drawback to an innate slot, though, is that after it's set into one of them, it defaults down to either what your psychic potential bonus is, or what the lowest passing difficulty for that power is, whichever is higher. So with that said, let's take a quick look at one of the psychic powers. This is Psychokinetic Armor, and it's a part of the Psychokinesis discipline. To learn this, you first need to spend a psychic point to gain affinity for Psychokinesis. After that, you can learn this power, since it is a level 1 Psychokinesis power. The first 2 columns in the effects table is the difficulty of the effect, with the third being what the effect is, as described by the description. Anywhere it lists fatigue and a number means if that's the highest difficulty you meet or beat, you failed at using that power, and you lose that much fatigue. Otherwise, you gain the effect listed for that row. So in order to gain 1 armor from Psychokinetic Armor, we need to roll at least 80 on our psychic potential. Since maintenance for this power is allowed, we can store it in an innate slot. If our potential before rolling was 130, we would be able to store this with the effect of a 2 armor rating. Though if it were only 60, we'd still get at least 1 armor rating, even though we don't meet the 80 medium difficulty. Let's finish up with the temporary uses for psychic points. All of these effects last for 1 roll, but after an hour, you'll regain the spent psychic point. First, psychic points can be used to temporarily raise your psychic projection. You can spend up to 5 points this way, and each one raises your projection by 10. Much in the same way you can raise projection, you can also raise your potential this way. Once again, you can spend up to 5 points, and each point raises your potential by 20. If you feel that you may fail at using a power, you can spend one psychic point before the psychic potential roll to prevent any fatigue loss you would take from that. Naturally, if you wound up succeeding, you essentially lost that psychic point. If there's a power in one of your disciplines you suddenly wind up wanting to use or try, you can spend a psychic point to gain temporary access to it. Powers gained this way, however, can't be maintained. Finally, psychic points can be used to improve a power that you're maintaining in an innate slot. Each point spent raises the potential for that power by 20, and the increase stays until the power is no longer maintained. However, the point also won't start regenerating until after the power stops being maintained. So going back to our psychokinetic armor example, if we have a potential of 60, granting us 1 armor, we can spend 3 of our psychic points to raise it another 60, making our potential 120 and giving us 2 armor instead. So with that in mind, here are some final thoughts on psychics in Anima. First, never underestimate the usefulness of having some unused psychic points. Not only can these be used as a Hail Mary to make one of your potential rolls much higher than it would normally be, but they can also be used to bump up the power of a maintained power. Second, if you plan on taking a maintainable power, get an innate slot. If you don't take an innate slot, you'll need to roll your potential every time you use that power, and that sort of inconsistency can be dangerous if your potential isn't high enough to guarantee success. Finally, advantages that affect psychic powers specifically are very effective, and are the key to making a truly powerful psychic. They more often than not will either negate or lessen some of the drawbacks of psychic powers, or improve what was already great about them. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section, which is also a convenient place for complaints and whining. Also, if you have any other requests for videos, you can leave those in the comments too. So, with all that said, I am Aaron Darshedel, and I will see you all next time.